Sorry, I'm trying to record here. We've been doing this series for our Acre alumni since we aren't able to get together and, socialize and have interesting speakers. So this is, I believe, our fourth presentation or third. And Julie, who I've known for many years, has done some amazing development work in our community, and we're so grateful that she's able to join us today, and share with you some of what she's done. Maybe you've heard of like the Sherman Phoenix. That's kind of like a real gem. The Tandem, which is also the Tandem building, the Wally Schmidt building is also a gem, and she'll talk more about it. Just some housekeeping rules. If everybody could keep their phone on mute, their video on mute, that would really be awesome. And then if you have questions for Julie, we're going to kind of keep those towards the end. You can put them in the chat, type that in, and then I will read those questions. So we're going to leave about 15 or more minutes for your conversations to have with Julie directly. I'd also like to introduce Matt Melendez, my teammate and colleague at LISC. Matt, do you have an update for the group on the WIDA application? Because I know we did a presentation on that.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Want to thank Sue for organizing this. Sue and I, since we've both joined LISC together, have really put an emphasis on providing technical assistance to people that are working on development projects. So please reach out to us anytime, and we will try and put our minds around your project, guidance, connect you with other potential partners, resources to the extent that we can. In May, we did a webinar on WIDA's low-income housing tax credit qualified allocation plan. So we have a copy of that PowerPoint. If people are interested in it, you can reach out to Sue. On June 1st, we did a webinar with Emily Francis of WIDA on the National Housing Trust Fund. That application was due June 15th. July, we may have another opportunity with WIDA. There's a federal resource called through HUD called Section 811, and this is a rental subsidy for affordable housing owners who provide housing to vulnerable populations, persons with a diagnosed disability. So WIDA has just reapplied to HUD for that resource, and we'll find out in July whether they get it. We'll get a webinar with them. And we just want to hear other ideas that people need help with. So I think from other talks, we might have a future conversation about site control, how to negotiate it, what site control tools you should have in your pocket, maybe selecting co-developer in strategies around that. But contact Sue with any additional ideas. And for instance, this afternoon, I'm working with someone, helping them score a potential WIDA project. So just want to say, hey, we're here to help. And Julie's a fantastic guest, so looking forward to her talk and her sharing her community-minded development and her tenacity and determination to get creative projects done against all odds. So that's my 2 cents, and looking forward to today's talk.
Welcome, Julie. It's your time. So grateful you're here.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I think if you didn't hear Sue's reminder at the beginning, if you can make sure you're muted. Little housekeeping, a bunch of you are not muted right now, so just make sure you're muted. And I will do my best. I'm a little rusty, and this is super awkward to do a speech in general, but also to do a presentation via Zoom, even though we're all kind of used to these platforms. But I thought I'd give a bit of background about where I've come from that has brought me to real estate. It's an unconventional background. And then I have a presentation I'll just walk you through that talks about the real estate model. I grew up in Milwaukee in the suburbs, sort of white suburbia, very classic Milwaukee. I went to school in Michigan. I got a degree in business and did sort of a grand Midwestern tour. I have a background in corporate America. I've worked for places like Procter and Gamble. I was in college, I was very much an environmental activist, and activism is part of my DNA. And I found most of my corporate. Okay, everybody, you got to mute yourselves.
Should be.
All right, well, we'll keep trying, right? So, I eventually found my way back to Milwaukee. I've worked in the nonprofit sector, but coming back into that real calling to be a change agent, I ultimately landed myself in real estate by accident. And it was really a mechanism to figure out ways I could make my neighborhood better. I'm just like most people where, I live in a neighborhood, I see what happens around me. I prefer to see different things happen, and started to take action around those things by joining my neighborhood association, becoming the president of my neighborhood association and the number of neighborhoods I lived in, and ultimately dabbling forward into real estate. And it's really with that really hodgepodge background, a business degree, environmental activism, corporate America, nonprofit leadership, that I became an entrepreneur before the word entrepreneur was kind of a thing, certainly before social entrepreneurship was a thing, before the internet and social media were a thing. And now I'm really trying to take a lot of the lessons I've learned stumbling through real estate to build what is more of a cohesive model, to take the lessons of what I've learned through those experiences so that others could replicate it. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I tend to talk fast, so you can unmute and tell me to slow down if I'm rambling too quickly. But my aim is to get through this so that we can have a dialogue and talk with each other. I see a bunch of friends, old friends, and old colleagues on the phone. You're going to be bored, colleagues, but you've heard this before. So let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. Sue, can you give a thumbs up if that looks okay? Does it look okay, Sue?
You should, that looks good. That looks good.
Okay, everybody, I think, as I understand it, there is a slight delay in my slide changes. So for some of you, it might take a couple seconds for it to advance. So what I want to talk to you about today is just to review basically my stumbling through discovery of the past 10 years of how to do real estate for the rest of us, by the rest of us, and what it looks like. Here's a few pictures of my projects. I'm wondering if any of you recognize any of these, but these are samples from 4 different neighborhoods. I've worked in about 6 different neighborhoods across Milwaukee, and those of you who are from here know that every neighborhood is very unique and distinct to itself, and so there's no 2 projects that are the same, no 2 neighborhoods are the same. So a lot of these projects have very different elements, but there are also some common themes across all that I'll talk about. What I've really been inspired about over time and recognize as themes is really shared pretty succinctly in this quote from the Democracy Collaborative. There's an assumption that really economics benefit everyone across the city. When a city grows, everybody benefits. And we all probably, if you're on this call, you recognize that that's a fallacy. That economics do not trickle down, do not trickle up, that there are systemic and entrenched barriers that prevent prosperity for all. And without intentional disruption and breaking down of those systems, we won't change places like Milwaukee that are systemically disinvested in parts. There's we always talk about how strong downtown is important for cities and places like Milwaukee, and that that translates into vibrant commercial districts across the city. Again, we know that does not translate to truth, partly because it just doesn't flow that way. We have to take a different approach to try and make sure that we see real estate transforming in places where the rest of us live. Don't forget to mute everybody. And then finally, there's this fallacy that's become really powerful to me around economic development, that large companies like the Foxcons of the world are really the way we transform economic opportunity. And while, we need all types of economic development across the continuum, there is tremendous power in small businesses. They make up most of the workforce, they make up most of the employment, they create most of the wealth, and little real estate projects and small businesses on main streets, while all of our economies are changing and how we intersect and buy goods and services is changing, there is still this heartbeat of communities that are main streets that matter. And that premise is what underscores all of the work that I've undertaken over the past decade or so. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, highlight a few of my projects in case some of you are unfamiliar with my work. The first real estate project I undertook was a very ambitious one, the Clock Shadow Building. That's that first picture, and that was previously a vacant lot, a little tiny lot that our neighbors would take the dogs to poop on. And it was actually a very toxic brownfield, one of the worst sites in the nation for metal smelting in its past. And it was just sitting there. You can see kind of in, can you please mute your mics, everybody? Everybody, please mute. Very distracting. So you can see buildings on this corridor to the left of that building, the Clock Shadow Building. It's a very small site. And what we placed on that building was this 4-story, 20,000 square foot building. It's considered one of the most environmentally progressive buildings at the time in the world. And I think still today, it's still very much the case. It uses like farm on the roof. It uses rainwater to flush the toilets. It's made up of almost all recycled materials, as much as possible. 50% of the materials are recycled content. So anyways, that was a very ambitious first project where I learned a lot. And I wouldn't say that I had all of the ideas for my model figured out when I built this building, just learning how to do real estate development. And one of the I'm just wondering if there's any way to get that person, is it only me who hears that? It's very hard to keep talking with somebody not on mute.
I can hear it too. It's distracting.
Yeah. If we could take a 30-second pause and literally everyone on the call, can you triple check that your phone is muted and that your video is muted? I'm not normally the logistics coordinator, but it's super distracting. Okay, it feels like it's quiet now unless people just are stopping for a second. So I'll keep going. Thank you, everybody. So what I learned in doing this first project really was that, you can undertake real estate on your own, I suppose, but there are incredible barriers. I was a trial by fire learning about access to capital, about how you recruit tenants, about how much things cost, that were really overwhelming. But I also learned a lot of things that were eye-opening that I think people take as assumptions that aren't true. And when you're either raised or educated traditionally in real estate, you sort of assume things just are the way they are, or just in general, the way systems work, you assume this is how it has to be. And by coming from outside as an activist, I broke down some of those assumptions. You can really build a financially profitable building that changes the environmental impact. I was told before I started this project that those kinds of ideas were not economically feasible. And that's just not true. It just means that you have to build a more sustainable return on investment. I learned a lot about how to access capital and the barriers to that I applied to my next project. So in some ways, this is very much a learning project for me. And I started to figure out certain things that were important around working with the community, around how to raise money, and around how to push barriers in traditional systems. Another example, I'll just keep moving through and I'll come back to give you some summaries of this. This next project is in Silver City, that was a more recent project. I partnered with a Silver City resident to create a co-working space along National Avenue at 35th Street. And this is designed as more of a co-working space for the rest of us. It isn't designed to help build tech companies or biomedical, infrastructure. It's really for folks who live in the near South Side, who maybe they're a nail tech and they're thinking about opening their first nail shop, or maybe it's just somebody who's home, a gig economy worker who wants a place to go to have a conference call or hold a meeting. This is a co-working space. that remains viable today. COVID has, of course, made everything difficult, but this is another example, a smaller project on a main street on the south side. The next project is a little more commonly known, and this is the Wally Schmidt project. This project we finished in 2016. It was about a little under $800,000 project. It's home for the Tandem restaurant. Many of you may know that restaurant. It is now pivoting during the pandemic and giving away free food in partnership with a number of restaurants across Milwaukee. And what a lot of people don't know is that there are 8 other small businesses that reside on the second and third floor of this building. So it was completely redeveloped into office space above, and those are mostly Black and women-owned businesses. And so this building has been thriving. It innovated one of the elements of my model, which is crowdfunding. There are 45 community owners of this building. So we have roughly 8 businesses, 45 owners. It cash flows a return on investment and has been catalyzing additional redevelopment. It's located in Lindsay Heights at roughly 18th and Fond du Lac Avenue. An incredible building. A couple other examples. Freshwater Fix is the name of the building that's back in Walker's Point. That has 3 local tenants. At the point, this was the first project I tried to crowdfund with, and I'll talk a little bit more about that after I run through these examples. But the crowdfunding of this project was really focused on making sure we could retain a foothold for local businesses in Walker's Point. At the time I built this building, I lived there. Many of my first projects were in neighborhoods I lived in because those were the neighborhoods I knew best. And this project, Walker's Point, was starting to transform, and it was becoming apparent to me that it was becoming less affordable for places like Purple Door Ice Cream, which is frankly where I just wanted to go with my son. And once they opened, I went there almost every day, which was good for my heart and soul and not my weight, but it was delicious. And without projects like these where we set affordable rents for tenants and really work with them to build out the space, places like Purple Door would not thrive because traditional economic models don't support tenants that are really community driven like this in some places that are starting to improve. So this is really a way to hold a foothold in the neighborhood. That is one of my few projects that is actually worth tremendously more than invested initially into the project. We think if we could sell that, likely it would get torn down for a much larger building, which is of course not our intent. Our intent is to stay a locally vibrant building with local ownership and local tenants. This was actually the first project I initiated a crowdsource funding project on, and I think there's 18 owners, and the minimum investment in this project was $5,000 per investor, whereas the Wally Schmidt project I just mentioned, that last one, that the minimum investment in that project was $1,000. So again, I'll come back to these elements of the model and how we put deals together, but that's just another example. Next example is the Innovation and Wellness Commons. A unique element of this project is it was a partnership with a nonprofit, and my co-developer, if you will, on this project was the Walnut Way Conservation Corps. We worked together. This project is located at 16th and North Avenue, also in the Lindsay Heights neighborhood. And when initially built, it was a hub for food-related entrepreneurs and nonprofits, and continues to evolve over the years since it's been built, and has helped to bring more economic activity to that commercial sector. I think that's you, Carrie Thomas, if you could mute thank you. So then the final project that I think most people know my work for more recently is the Sherman Phoenix. And that project is located at 36th and Fond du Lac Avenue in the Sherman Park neighborhood. And it was born out of the police shooting of a Black man in Sherman Park in 2016. And it has been transformed into a hub of wellness, food, and cultural activities for almost 30 Black-owned businesses. And that is a whole presentation in and of itself, but it really brought together all of the elements of the model that I cultivated across all those previous projects in the past 10 years. So I'm gonna do a deeper dive in the Sherman Phoenix as I walk through this project. Just random highlights that you can all ask me about as we get done with this, but just wanted to show you some interior pictures of all the projects I just highlighted. A really critical component of real estate development that's inclusive recognizes that tenants that want to open up in places like these main streets often do not have capitalization, just like people like me who are new developers do not have access to capital. So when we as a real estate developer look at building a building, we think very hard about what it takes to build the space out for the tenant. We don't assume the tenant can pay for that because typically they cannot. So in raising money for our projects, we have to overraise what a traditional developer might consider so that we can make the space ready for the tenant. And there's some risk involved in that. Obviously, if Purple Door Ice Cream stopped being Purple Door Ice Cream, we'd have to really spend a lot of money to change the makeup of that space from what it is today to a use for somebody else. But that's the risk we invest in. Historically, in our projects, we've had extremely, extremely low turnover. And that's because we build sustainability into the project from the beginning. We look at business plans with our tenants and say, what can your business plan reasonably afford? And set rents accordingly, making sure that it's affordable for the tenant, yet can still deliver a return on investment for our owners. And that's a really important reason why we have local owners, is because all of us who own these buildings don't expect to get rich and retire on a beach somewhere someday with these investments. We just want to make our communities better, not lose money, maybe get a little bit of return, but really our return is measured in many more ways than just the financial bottom line. So I just want to show you some pictures of the interiors, which are very different and very beautiful. These are just some elements of the model, very specifically in terms of the financing. I mean, most real estate projects, it comes down to money. And there's a major reason why projects don't get done in the neighborhoods I work in. And that's because the financial systems are broken, that we can never get valuations on our projects where traditional underwriting would work. Sorry, just distracted by noise. Hello, mute your mics, everybody. Here's some pictures of Malzane, can you please? It's down. There we go. So here, this is some pictures of the Tandem restaurant, again, 18th and Fond du Lac. And this project was where many of the elements of my model really crystallized for me. It was, the last project I did before the Tandem was the Purple Door Ice Cream building in Walker's Point. And I had gotten a few projects under my belt by then. I'd started to call myself a real estate developer, which is kind of funny to me that, I'd sort of made it up as I went. And then all of a sudden I was considered a professional real estate developer. But what I recognized was that, my projects were primarily being done by white people and that they were primarily funded, even though they were crowdfunded, by people who looked like me. And I'm constantly trying to figure out ways to make Milwaukee better. And it became very clear that until I found ways for more inclusivity in my projects, that I would not really be moving the needle in terms of economic impact, in terms of change, in terms of creating a more perfect Milwaukee. And so the Tandem was an opportunity to test whether what I had been trying to figure out really could work in a way that was not just for people who looked like me, but in all of our neighborhoods, including those predominantly disinvested parts of the city. The Tandem is located in the 53205, 53206 zip codes, which are some of the most challenged economically in our city. So it was a great opportunity for potential to find untapped brilliance and to see if it could work. And it's very much a thriving example. It's one of the most successful projects. It has been surviving through some of the most hardest times right now because there's so much resilience built into this model. So I'm going to talk just briefly about all the elements of the model, and then we're going to open up for questions. But there's really kind of three strategies over time that have emerged as what makes these projects successful. It's a co-developer mentorship model that is bringing together real estate expertise on the one hand and community expertise on the other and merging them together. And those are often not found in the same person. So bringing both points of view and the ecosystem of each together has been critically important. The second piece is how we recruit tenants, who our tenants are, and how we cultivate them for occupancy and for success. And then finally, that community-driven ownership component I've referenced. And I'm just going to dive into each of these using the Sherman Phoenix as an example to talk about how they've worked for me and how they can be replicated. Hopefully you all have had an opportunity to be to the Sherman Phoenix. It's tough right now. We are slowly reopening in very small ways, but certainly nobody could have predicted COVID, and it's been an incredible challenge. But nonetheless, the picture on the left is a Burns Bank building that was burned during uprisings in 2016 after that shooting. And the picture on the right is the grand opening of the Sherman Phoenix in 2019. Life travels fast. It was one of the greatest moments of my life. One of the most powerful experiences to be in that room on that night and experience a Milwaukee like never before. And if you were there, you know what I'm talking about. So, we opened in 2018. See, right, exactly. Mostly Black-owned businesses, cultural hub, a wellness center. We have where you can get your hair done. You can buy a set of kicks. You can buy chicken wings, funky fresh spring rolls. We have a bakery, a yoga studio, all kinds of opportunities. We've also integrated programming in the space when we were open. We have all kinds of events, everything from hosting the Elvin Ailey dance troupe from New York City to STEM programming in a math club on site. So it's really a phenomenal space that is like a new gathering spot for social entrepreneurs, for the community, for across the community, for across the region. You see all folks in that space coming together. It's the Milwaukee you dream of. And it's what we all want, just spaces to be together. There's a really spectacular before picture. And part of what makes a difference is not just figuring out how to do this stuff and not assuming it can't be done by just the rest of us, but also then being very intentional about who we recruit. On the left is a picture of my team. That's not what a typical construction team looks like. That's my architectural team. That's my project management team. That's my co-developer team. That's my construction team. So it's a fierce, powerful group of women who were behind the physical redevelopment of this project. And the rest are pictures of some of our tenants. So that co-developer model is really key. And in the middle is Joanne Sabir, who is my partner on the development of the Sherman Phoenix. On the left is Jeremy Davis. He's my partner on the development of the Wally Schmidt Tandem building. And on the right is Sharon and Larry Adams, the leaders at the time of Walnut Way Conservation Corps. So in each project, when we came together as partners. And I brought sort of math. I could do a lot of math and a lot of real estate development stuff, because by the time we had been doing these projects, I've been figuring it out for about 10 years. And my partners all are grounded in community in one way or another. Jeremy lives in the Lindsay Heights neighborhood, runs the Blue Skies landscaping crew for Walnut Way. Joanne is a very well-known community leader across Milwaukee and now the country in terms of her leadership in community development. So we learn from each other. And what's really important is for real estate projects to work in places where traditional systems has failed, it takes both those points of view. I could certainly have come into Sherman Park on my own and been successful. I would have failed miserably because I don't understand the ecosystem. I don't have the relationships, nor do I have trust from those who would be willing to consider being our tenants and willing to take a risk. Frankly, just like we were taking a risk on them, they needed to take a risk on us that this vision would come to reality. So it required both perspectives, and that's a key element of the model. Another key element is how we cultivate tenants. We assume that most of our tenants will not have had a shot yet because it's inherent. They're willing to, move their business on Fond du Lac Avenue and 35th Street, or Fond du Lac and 18th, or 35th and National, or neighborhoods where maybe more established businesses have decided not to move because that's their community. They understand it well. They know what will be successful as a business. However, they don't have access to capital because they, ask their friends and family. They've used any credit cards they could come up with, and they're out of cash. We recognize that there's brilliance in each of us, just like any other human, and they should have an opportunity to succeed just as well. So we do, require that people think through their business plans, and we work with them on that, but we're a supportive partner, and we approach tenants and occupants as our partners in projects rather than people who are just going to pay us rent. We are really in this together. They have to succeed for us to succeed, and vice versa. So we think about, how do we, as I mentioned before, pay for improvements they might need to make their space work. It's been proven that those investments generate a return. It's not a mistake to take the approach of funding it for them. We build each of our buildings like family. In the Tandem building, for example, we have a 3 children's court lawyers who rent the top floor. They committed to prepay their rent for the next 3 months because they were in position to do that, so that other tenants in the building who could not pay rent could take a break during pandemic. It's this ecosystem of tenants who support each other that's really helping buildings be viable. And then, of course, we are champions for each other. Everybody who's an owner in our building supports all these tenants. They support each other, and that creates these reinforcing circles of support for tenants in these multi-tenant buildings. And then the last innovation is how do we get capital to flow in places where it doesn't flow? And in most of my projects, we don't take bank debt because it's not available to us. And frankly, we want to disrupt those systems. The financial systems are mostly broken in these parts of Milwaukee. And so we developed a community funding model. You know, on the left, you see a picture of Jeff, who was my intern on the Wally Schmidt project for the tandem. He's cleaning the tandem floor in that picture. He earned sweat equity and an ownership stake in the project by participating in that way. In the middle is a group of local Milwaukeeans who are owners in that building, and on the right is another who is an architect on one of my projects who's invested in 3 of my projects. So we have a minimum of usually a dozen owners, up to as many as 75 owners in my last project. Most come from the neighborhood. The minimum investment is usually $1,000. In order to get that to work, we also have to allow some people to invest a higher amount. And over time, I've cultivated a group of what we call sort of angel investors who have the means to invest at a higher level. And all of the investors do it for a financial return, certainly, but they do it for a triple bottom line. Typically, the social, environmental, and economic impact of projects matters to each of our investors. And they're willing to take, in some cases, as low as a 3% return. In best cases, in my projects, we're up to about an 8% return. And if you talk to traditional real estate investors, they're generally looking for double-digit returns. And I would argue that's exactly the model that is failing us. When only parts of society get that kind of return, and only parts of society can make those investments, and then they suck all of that return out of community, it doesn't recirculate. With this model, these are neighbors. They live next to this real estate. Maybe they own one of the businesses inside the real estate. Maybe their kid works at the ice cream shop. You know, so they have a vested interest in success, and they will visit that real estate. They will frequent those tenants. They will tell their friends. They will have dinner at the tandem. And it's this recirculating interest and recirculating wealth that really adds value to our projects and is the way we really lift them. And Fund Milwaukee is an organization I helped start that is a vehicle to bring people together to pitch projects like these. And I won't spend a lot of time on that, but as I started my first project, my first real estate project, I was thinking, what do I really want across from my house? And the answer was, I would like ice cream that I can walk to. And I just one day got on my bike and biked up to a street festival where Purple Door Ice Cream was giving out samples. And I said to them, I think you should move out of your kitchen and into my building. And we should figure out a way to do it. And I actually founded Fund Milwaukee as a way to bring a bunch of people together to raise money for Purple Door Ice Cream as one of our initial funded businesses. So that's a much longer story too, but you know, it was just a very DIY, do-it-yourself kind of structure of figuring out how we can take the little money we have as individuals, kind of like Little House on the Prairie, way back in the day, just, you know, give people credit, work with each other, build a community together, and let everybody rise up as a result of that. I guess I just put in a little picture here of Sherman Phoenix, which is beautiful. I'd love to show this picture. We just finished our exterior work, partly helped by grants. A lot of our projects do have some subsidy, initially from philanthropy, that is designed to close an economic gap. So this project cost $4.5 million. We couldn't raise all that with equity and generate a return. So we had to use some public support and some philanthropy. And this is an example of how philanthropy really helped enliven the space. We believe that there should be beauty everywhere in the world, and certainly it should happen at 36 in Fond du Lac. So this is kind of a summary of the impact of the projects over time. The work I've helped do in partnership with community and other co-developers has impacted 5 different Milwaukee neighborhoods. A cumulative value of the real estate is over 17 million. There's dozens and dozens of businesses that have opened and are thriving, hundreds and hundreds of jobs, and hundreds of community owners in those pieces of real estate. So you can see how the collective impact of this is powerful when you look at how we invest in things like Foxconn or other large corporations, how when you distribute investment with individuals participating and public participating in unique ways, you can really have a transformative impact across a number of neighborhoods and a number of buildings and businesses. And we've had some great gatherings at Sherman Phoenix, and I really hope we can return to that soon. This is a great quote by my partner. I just wanted to include it. I mean, we're really trying to shift the paradigm from social service and nonprofit to wealth creation using social enterprise. And how can we do that collectively together? I'm just wrapping up with a couple things I'm working on now. I'm working on a project with SWIM, Scaling Wellness in Milwaukee. It's a collective of a number of mental health, behavioral health, trauma-informed organizations working to create change desperately needed in these times and always. We're hoping to build a facility on the near west side of Milwaukee. The Growing Season is the name of a project. It's me dabbling outside of Milwaukee. I was recruited by a client in Evanston, Illinois. So I'm trying to see if this model can work, and I'm learning a lot about what does and what doesn't work outside of Milwaukee where I don't have a network. I'm starting to see all kinds of amazing work happen by others, not certainly as a result of my work, but hopefully building on it and breaking through new barriers and innovations. I just am amazed by Q Alameen and many other ACRE graduates who are tackling some of the toughest work with some of the least resources and experience and just breaking through something awesome. And my hope is that a lot of you can replicate this in work you're doing, whether it's as a developer or as a part of a system that needs to be disrupted and innovated, expanding throughout Milwaukee, throughout neighborhoods. And ultimately, there's always been the idea of, should we develop a fund? You know, with each of my projects, it takes a couple years at a time to raise all this money. It's hard work, and you can only do so many projects at a time. What would it look like if we actually had some funding in advance to do more than one project at a time? And that's always been a goal. And that's really it. That's it for me. If I can figure out how to exit this, I will put us back on. And then Sue, you can jump in. I don't know if there have been any questions generated, but I think now's the time.
Hi, Julie. Thank you. That was really, wow. I didn't even know you did all those projects. I thought I did, but we do have some questions. I know that Elizabeth Szynski, and you might have answered some of her questions on how do you find the tenants, or do you find them, as far as your story about riding your bike to Purple Door ice cream at a fair. She's asking, since you custom fit the interiors for your tenants, do you need to find and confirm all tenants before finalizing to a project? And then she asks, how do you find them? Do they find you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, a critical element of success around tenant engagement is community grounding. And most, like that bicycle example is pretty lame, but that's literally how I did it when I was living in Walker's Point. But in Sherman Park and Lindsay Heights, those aren't my communities of expertise. So that's where having a co-developer, whether that's you, the person living in the neighborhood, or your connected partner or maybe organization, helps find, they know, neighborhood organizations know who's hustling, who's trying to expand, who's looking for space, who are the brilliant entrepreneurs on that block, who's baking a cake in their kitchen, who's ready to scale up. So in the case of the Sherman Phoenix, that was 1,000,000% Joanne Sabir and all of her network of relationships. So number one, it is having those connections. Number two, it is asking communities. So with the Sherman Phoenix and all projects, we generally start by having many open community conversations where we invite community in and ask, who's doing this? Who's looking for space? It's not complicated. It's merely saying, we're not bringing to you what we think you want. We're asking you, what do you need? And who are the best entrepreneurs to do that work? So it's a very inclusive process. I often say that community participation is not a step in the process. It is the process. And from there, in terms of building out the space, it's a cookie cutter sort of puzzle that never is quite the same. We sort of go one step at a time. We typically hope to find what we consider kind of like an anchor, some business that's really strong that we can build around, whether that was the Shindig at the Sherman Phoenix as the coffee shop, or if it's the Tandem restaurant or purple door ice cream. You know, it's been a little bit of luck as much as science. And then we build around that. And it's just really a puzzle. You take the best you can get, you take some chances. You know, sometimes it fails. In the Sherman Phoenix, we have a little bit of turnover. You just have to think a little bit beyond your first tenant to think, how will we move past that? So there's no exact roadmap for that. It's really just constant conversations and adaptations.
Yeah, and I think you really know how to build trust. As you said, you're not coming in there and saying, we think your community needs this. You're saying, community, I'm here to find out what you need and what you want. I think that's critical. We have a question from Jackie who says, you said it takes a few years to get funding for a new project. Could you please expand more about the timeline of a project like this from start to finish?
Yeah, I want to make sure I don't forget to say that on my website, we do have links to case studies of almost all the projects I've worked on, including a case study for the collective of projects. And I invite you to download either those individual, click on each building and there should be a case study for many of them, or a total case study. It's fixeddevelopment.com. And in there, in most of our projects, we walk through sort of the timeline. Generally speaking, it can be, the least it is a year, and typically it's 2 years. And obviously most of us do not have the ability to sort of float our lives for 2 years. So, I mean, most of us as real estate developers have other work, other jobs, until we have enough income coming in to make this possible. That's tough. That's been tough work for me. It's tough for my co-developers. You know, usually we'll have a little bit of a lift from, let's say a lot of our projects are foreclosures from the city. So maybe we'll get a commitment that we can buy that project, but we get, the website is fixdevelopment.com for those asking, fixdevelopment.com. We usually get a little bit of a on-ramp of time if it's a foreclosure where the city will say, okay, you won the RFP, you can buy this building where you're going to put the tandem. And then we have maybe 6 months to raise some money. Maybe we write a little grant through the city. There was like a commercial foreclosure grant fund for a hot minute. I don't know if that still exists. Or maybe a place like LISC has a little bit of funding available. That gives us a little bit of due diligence time to investigate. And ultimately, then we start raising money over that first 6-month period. Usually it relies on some seed funding. If it's not the public sector or philanthropy, it's from maybe one of these angel investors. And mind you, I understand that coming at this for the first time, this is hard. With that Clock Shadow building, I think it took me 4 years. I mean, I didn't know people, I didn't know how to raise money, and I didn't know people with money. So it took a process of getting to learn that. I think now there's more places like Fund Milwaukee where you can pitch projects. There's more sort of pitch opportunities. I think this is more known as a way to distribute funds, but definitely you have to be prepared for a long road. I mean, I guess the upside is in the places I develop, there's not a ton of people hot on my heels trying to steal the building away. You know, there is regrettably the opportunity to take the time. It's just that it moves slowly. And that's hard for me personally, economically, for my own financials, but it's also hard for communities to wait that long for change to happen.
Thank you, Julie. We have another question. When you refer to crowdfunding, are you subject to accredited investors regulations? If not, how do you get around that to allow community members to participate?
That's a really good question. When I founded this thing called Fund Milwaukee, way back before crowdfunding was a thing, we didn't have GoFundMe or Kickstarter. None of that stuff existed. But we were like, okay, why can't we just give each other money? Not even a lot of money. Like, what's the deal? So it was just me and like 8 random people I collected together. And we met once a month for like a year to figure out, how does the SEC work? What does it mean to be regulated as a security? And it was a crazy mind warp, but eventually we learned that you can legally give to each other if you consider each other friends and family. So we formed a network that we call Friends and Family. And all of you are now on this call with me. I think you're my friends, and you can join Fund Milwaukee too. It's just a bunch of, it's not a, you don't pay anything to join. It's just a collection of friends who get together, listen to each other's ideas, and then say, I'd like to give you some money. That's essentially not a regulated exchange. Now, I've never invited the SEC in to evaluate this. We sort of just took some risks, and it's 10 years later and nobody's come calling yet. But it's certainly, it's a arena that people feel like afraid to enter. And we just said, oh, screw it. What do we got to lose? We got a lot to lose by not making change in Milwaukee. So number one, that's what we did. Number two, definitely, I'm not accredited. I mean, we now have some accredited folks who are interested in moving their money in this way, but the vast majority of folks in my deals are unaccredited. And so there are two ways we get around that. One is that there are what's called a Regulation D, I think, way to form an offering where you can have up to 35 unaccredited investors. So I can have up to 35 unaccredited investors in any deal I did. And since I started doing this work, Wisconsin has changed their crowdfunding laws. And now I actually operate under the crowdfunding rules, which provide an unlimited number of unaccredited investors in my deal. The flip of that is, though, they're limited to only $10,000, which frankly is not an issue because most of my unaccredited investors generally do not seek to invest more than that amount. So that's a very quick cliff notes of this, but we definitely are doing it legally. We definitely figured out a way to navigate it initially, sort of friends and family, and then we did it legally through limiting the number, and now we do it legally through limiting the amount. And I can share more on that if anybody's interested really in drilling into that. But, I can tell you right now, I've dealt with a ton of unaccredited investors and a ton of accredited, and there's no brilliance difference. The savvy of a $1,000 investor is equal to or often greater than somebody who has all kinds of money. So the SEC is in place to protect us from making bad investments. And I can tell you, we're all smart people, and we are able to make choices in our life every day. And I would just like to expand that opportunity to those who would like to take a part in Sherman Phoenix, put $1,000 in there and take the risk that they might lose their money, because they hopefully won't. And they're also doing it for a lot of other reasons beyond that $1,000.
Thank you, Julie. I just want to share my personal story where Julie and Jeremy were doing the handover.
2-year life.
And my means only allowed me to invest $50, okay? But I not invest, give them $50. So I did that, but what
Is she coming across weird to everybody else? Yeah, hold on, Sue. Your mic is a little weird. Right.
Okay. Is this better?
You sound like an alien.
I'm not sure why.
Let's see here. I'm going to run through the questions while we see if she can get her mic figured out.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
When is the next Fund Milwaukee meeting? Hey, if you all are looking to learn more about Fund Milwaukee, they have a website, fundmilwaukee.org. They typically meet once a month. You can go to the website and check out Elizabeth, who's on the board, is answering now. So thanks. I thought I saw you on there, Elizabeth. It is virtually meeting right now, so but it's still a great place to connect.
Someone talks about TIF or opportunity zones. Have you ever used that?
You're still cuckoo. Actually, how do you convince angel investors? Yeah, I mean, what I will say about that is it took me a long time to develop relationships with angel investors, and it's very hard. It's disproportionate. When I first started, I was actually younger, and they would pat me on the head, or as a woman, they'd pat me on the head like, oh, aren't you cute with these cute ideas? And I think that over time I've built up credibility, but what you're seeing now is especially now it's like Black Lives Matter. I can't not tell you how many people are calling me and my partner Joanne, and probably a bunch of you saying like, what can we do? Help us figure out how to, and my first thing is educate yourself. But actually a lot of people are now finally are thinking, are there ways to move into this space? I was on a call last night with the University Club of Milwaukee and a bunch of members, and one of the women was saying, hey, I'm a white woman who lives in Brookfield. How do I invest in Sherman Phoenix? And the fact that question's even being asked is transformative. I don't know if she was an accredited investor, but for a lot of my investors, what has proven to be useful is that I have gotten I just started being very idealistic and talking my idealistic language, and I've learned how to speak their language. So it's very much what many of us are used to when we walk in different worlds. How do you walk and talk like the people you're meeting with? So I know what a capital stack is, and I can talk about how I build my capital stack, and I can use financial language, but I can also use it more powerfully because I also understand how it translates in community. And a lot of the folks in traditional finance can't reciprocate, but I can speak their language in a way that's powerful to them, and that has been a useful tool to me in being successful. I don't know about there is a question about opportunity zones here in the chat. I don't know if Sue is gone again, but I don't know much about opportunity zones. I have not tapped opportunity zones. I will say that generally my feeling about large governmental programs is there's a hopeful optimism and they are meaningful in some ways, but generally speaking, new market tax credits, low-income housing tax credits, all sorts of interventions by government are generally tooled in such a way that they work for large projects. We drop in a large low-income housing tax credit development or a large commercial development. Some of those are good and some of those aren't. But in general, they aren't Main Street developments. The economics of those kinds of subsidies rarely work for the deals I'm in, and the same is true with opportunity zones. You know, it's amazing to me how many outside actors can work to manipulate some of those tools to benefit the same old traditional systems. I think it has created some new opportunities for new investors, new developers, and new communities, but a lot of it tinkers around the edges sometimes. And so these kinds of disruptions are really not led by community programming.
Do I sound better now?
Nope.
Okay, I'm gonna go away. Matt?
Can you jump in, Matt?
Yeah, so there's a question in here from Ashley. How do you convince angel investors or larger sum investors to believe in a real estate development model that relies on a large group of diverse and entrepreneurial businesses?
Yeah, I was trying to get at that before. I mean, I think ultimately you're not going to convince all of them, right? You have to find, I mean, many of my investors are women. And many of my angel investors are women, and many of my tenants are women, and many of the smaller investors are women and people of color. You know, find your compatriots. Find, you know, generally speaking, the people of color in the communities I work in are not needing convincing. They're like, finally, you know, this is happening on my street and with my neighbor who's brilliant, and this building that's been, you know, owned by an absentee owner forever and is now trash. Let's do this together. So it's really finding a connection to people of means, and those are more limited. Over time, I think the pool is expanding, but you know, traditional people with money come from traditional systems, and they will constantly ask me questions about what if, but if, what if. And I start from the premise of, do you want things to change or not? And if you keep applying the same metrics of evaluation to the project, you're never going to get a different outcome. We have to start by taking risk in different ways. And if you're not willing, then I don't want to waste my time with you, because I'm not going to convince you it's going to work the way you want it to. It's going to work a different way, and you have to understand you're not an expert at that. And my brilliant colleagues who are my co-developers are experts at that. These tenants are more expert at how to deliver this product or service than you're ever going to be. You're applying the wrong evaluation. And until we get leaders all the way up through systems who are disrupting and transforming those systems, it's going to have to keep happening at this grassroots level, and you're going to have to target angels who are willing to be open-minded.
So another question, as a developer, how are your mission-based projects faring versus your market-driven projects during the pandemic? Do the mission-based funders have more patience and provide more stability and support?
Yeah, I think my challenge in answering that is I don't have many market-based projects per se. They're all kind of mission-driven. What I will say generally is they're all, I don't want to say thriving, that's a bit overstating it, but none are, there's only one that's really struggling. And the one that's struggling is the one project where I took traditional bank debt. And I guess that kind of gets to the point. So that's the closest to market I probably have. It does have 50 community owners, but instead of using philanthropy, because it was in a neighborhood that was sort of ironically more prosperous. It's on the edge of River West and Harambe. It was viewed as bankable. I went ahead and got a bank loan. And in that case, it's the one that's struggling the most. It's also because of the type of user that is really affected by the pandemic. But in general, my community mission-driven projects are thriving. It's because we don't have bank debt, so we don't have somebody calling a mortgage on us. And without that threat, we are in strong position. So all of our equity investors are very easy to say, go ahead, we're not going to get a return this year, that's fine. I will hold off on getting a 3% return on my investment if you can help these tenants survive. The real issue is, can we bring enough cash in so that they don't have to pay rent? Most of these projects don't have a lot of reserve. So they're tight. But in the example of the Tandem restaurant, that's where we have some stronger tenants helping offset some weaker tenants. So generally speaking, what we're finding in this situation is the resilience of these projects is amazing. And it's for all those reasons. It's really held by community and held up and supported by an ecosystem. And I'm loving that. It's not that it's not hard. It's extremely hard, but it's been pretty beautiful.
Very good, very good. We only have 2 or 3 minutes left here, so I'm going to attempt to wrap up. Sue, whose communication is failing, has prompted me to tell a little story. She's always very creative, much more than me. I'm just kind of a straight numbers guy. But Sue has told me this story often, and I think told you, Julie, as well yesterday, of how much she loves the Tandem, and that she doesn't have the deepest pockets like all of us here, but she did make a small investment in it, and to the point where she loves going there out to eat now because she gets to see the little tile with her name on it. So I think just that just reinforces that when community members invest, one of your slides says they become customers, right? They become patrons. They want to see success, and I think that rubs off, I'm sure, with everyone who contributes to the project, whether it's monetarily or, like you said, the person who contributed through sweat equity. So, Julie, I don't know if you have any parting comments, but I just want to say thank you very, very much. And for all of our participants, we are certainly always looking for additional ideas or subject matters. So feel free to reach out to Sue via email. And like I said, we've been doing these at least monthly, if not twice a month, and we'll continue to engage you. Julie, any parting comments?
Yeah, I'm just gonna, I'm putting my email in the chat real quick. If you guys all want to take, Elizabeth, you can help me here, Milwaukee.org. My website and the Fund Milwaukee. So if you want to take down my email, feel free to email me additional questions if I didn't get to it. Feel free to check out my website where you can download case studies. There is a very large case study of all the projects on the main page somewhere. And then if you drill into each project, you can get them specific to each building. I thank you all for taking the time to be on this call. We're busy, and I know your time is your most precious asset. So I hope that it was valuable. I hope that you all go out and continue to do great work in the community. Nice to see the names of some familiar faces in the chat, and be well.
Julie, one last thing, or I guess for everyone, we did record this, so LISC will be able to figure out how to share that. And then your PowerPoint, some people have contacted us. Is that something you're willing to share?
Yeah, sure. It's really large. I guess I'll send it to you, Matt, and you can figure out how to disseminate, okay?
Perfect. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.